Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Unsettled Scores, DAG Team Series Book 2 by Kel O'Connor, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Amy Stewart hit the pause button on her phone, and the quiet drone of the ventilation system replaced the sound of screaming guitars and thumping bass as the music ended. The beat echoed in her head, and she set off, prowling around this shadowy training gym, her movements as fluid as a dancer's. A high kick sent the first punching body swaying on its base. Twirling away, she flicked the knife in her hand toward the second dummy, not stopping to see if it made contact. The dim lighting almost obscured the rope that was next in her path. It would be easier to tuck and roll underneath, but Amy instead executed a gymnast flip over the waist-high obstacle. Easy wasn't fun. She had just pivoted sharply to her right when the overhead speakers crackled. "Suit up, garage in 10. The voice belonged to her team leader, Dell, alerting them that they would leave for their op in 10 minutes. Panting from exertion, Amy stopped to pick up the knife from the padded floor. Her hand closed around the handle, wanting to stab it into the dummy form she'd missed. Actually, she wanted to repeatedly slash the inanimate object. Two things kept her walking toward the locker room. She didn't have time to waste, and her boss would question the violence. After almost 3 years of overwhelming numbness, the last few months of intense anger felt equally alarming and invigorating. At first, she had reveled in the sharp emotion, using it to hone her fighting skills. Lately, though, she found it difficult to rein in her feelings. Workouts only ended when she collapsed. Sleep eluded her while furious thoughts ran through her head. What she needed was a real-life challenge, she thought. Luckily, she had a job that allowed her to work out her frustrations on unsavory characters, so tonight's op was heaven sent. Her steps bounced as she hurried to grab her gear, eager to get underway. Waiting was torture, but it was part of the gig, she consoled herself later. On this op, her job was to take down anyone who fled the building that housed Thompson Enterprises. Anyone who wasn't one of her DAG teammates, that is. She crouched behind a row of leafy bushes, her muscles coiled, ready to pounce. Her body zinged with electricity, eager to kick some ass. Slowly and without sound, she straightened one leg and then the other before resuming her watch. It wouldn't do any good if her legs cramped up if someone ran by. Even though her gun was holstered on her hip, she preferred not to use it. Gunshots had a way of attracting attention, and that was the last thing DAG wanted. She flexed her hands and stretched her neck, her eyes never leaving the front entrance to the 2-story structure of chrome and glass. While the building had modern lines, to Amy it looked like someone had added windows to a toaster. She could imagine that the facade was blinding in full sunlight. The design screamed, "I'm so impressive, you must avert your eyes." Pretentious and overdone, much like the company founder and CEO Timothy Benson. The Toad brazenly let it be known that he owned the formula for a bioweapon, a gas that could take out an entire building in seconds. Rumor was Benson was about to sell it to a terrorist group. Thompson Enterprises officially produced vaccines. DAG agents were here to steal the bioweapon formula and all information relating to the potential buyer. Data Acquisitions Group was formed when two of the founders, Daniel and Peter, left their positions as CIA agents after busting and immediately befriending the brilliant hacker Malachi. Their combined talents allowed them to take black ops contracts from the government and become quite wealthy, playing by their own rules. There was even a legitimate part to the business that handled background checks for businesses. Amy had been part of the elite field team since her life had blown apart 3 years ago, and she loved it. Meting out justice and kicking ass. What more could she wish for in a job? Whoever planned this landscaping had no clue about security, she thought, and rolled her eyes. The hedges were too thick, too close to the building, and currently shielding Amy from anyone who might look outside. Tonight, the moon was only a tiny sliver in the sky, a bit of luck that helped conceal them. At least the slight autumn breeze kept her cool. DAG's combat gear was black, flexible, and light. It was the knit cap hiding her blonde hair she hated. It was stifling, and it felt like 1,000 fire ants attacking her scalp while sweat matted her hair. According to their intel, it was about to be a shift change for the 6 guards, who should be clustered in the back security office. 6 was a small number, but the team always came prepared for a fight. While the others came ready for defensive actions, Amy longed for a fight. She yearned to have someone to pummel. If she were being truthful, she yearned to pummel her teammate, Mick, even if it was only one hit. She could lay him out with one punch. She knew she could. Lord, she needed to talk to Peter and ask for a reassignment. Her malice towards Mick was no better than it had been 4 weeks ago when he'd banished his girlfriend Kit to God knows where. While she hadn't known her long, Amy considered Kit a friend. They had an awful past in common. That's why Mick's betrayal was so personal to Amy. Yes, a lunatic was after Kit, and a new identity far away made sense. However, Kit had wanted to stay with Mick. Instead, he broke her heart, rejecting her when she'd needed him the most. The anger that chafed at her being was a drastic change from her former demeanor. While it was thrilling to feel more alive, emotional anesthesia had been easier for work. It had kept her mind clear. Thanks to her coworker, all she saw now was red. Fucking bastard, Amy thought again for the millionth time. Mick had been with DAG less than a year, and she'd been impressed with the Brit until he tossed Kit aside. He'd survived a horrific prison sentence after being caught as a spy in Iraq. Despite that, he seemed put together and had incredible skills with numbers and locks. His quiet and intelligent demeanor meshed well with the team, which meant her animosity toward him could be deadly. She made a mental note to go straight to Peter when this op was completed. Inside the CEO's office, Mick held a small black box up to the safe, watching the digital numbers fill the reader. He straightened to his full height to stretch some tension out of his back. The muscles protested, and he welcomed the small twinge. He preferred physical pain over the emotional anguish that had set up house inside him. Thank heavens he was back at work and staying busy. Less time to dwell on his despair. Time bore down on him. His part should have been over 2 minutes ago, but triple protocols protected the safe. He felt rather than saw Mateo return to the room. Damn, the man was light on his feet. Mick envied that. He was too tall and too broad to be stealthy. Mateo moved like a ghost, while Mick considered himself to be more like of a rhino. Well, perhaps not. He didn't stomp or lumber. Hadn't Kit once referred to him as a giraffe? A sharp pain squeezed his chest, and he pushed the motion away. Don't think of her, he ordered himself. You're on the job. Later, he could again wallow in his pain. Tonight, his team and many more were counting on him. What's taking so long? Mateo whispered. I have everything we need from the server. Just then, the safe latch clicked open. Mick sighed with relief, and then he swept the contents into a drawstring bag he'd pulled from his pocket. In the dim light, he saw wads of cash papers and 2 external drives fall inside before pulling the top closed. Mateo saw the drives, too. Fan-fucking-tastic. If what they required wasn't on the download, the information would be on the drives. There had been no time to comb through everything and find exactly what they needed, so Mateo's job had been to download it all and then wipe the server. Too bad for Thompson Enterprises. They would have to begin from the ground up. Everything from payroll files to toilet paper purchases were now in DAG's hands. Mateo had left an added gift of a nasty virus that Malachi had concocted. It would fry every PC within the hour. 30 seconds, Dell's warning was sharp in their ears. Soon, half the guards would clock out and the other half would take up watch. Mission complete, headed out. Mateo's whisper came clearly through everyone's earpieces. The rest of the team went on high alert. Whitaker was hidden outside at the back entrance. Meanwhile, Archie was off to the left. They plus Amy had each exit point covered just in case. Since they finished on time, the original withdrawal plan was in place. Mick and Mateo would depart through the side door furthest from the security office. Amy watched as 2 shadows emerged from the inset doorway. One tall, one slight, Mick and Mateo. She stood ready to return to the lake where Archie had landed his plane and get the hell out of here. She could hear distant traffic noise, then all hell broke loose, starting with a high-pitched alarm. A thrill zinged through her, so sharp it amazed her that sparks didn't fly from her fingers. She bent down, ready to sprint, and had no clue why she was smiling. The security guards, equipped with night vision goggles, spilled out outside door. Amy shook her head at the way they announced their presence with a roar. Obviously not well-trained goons, she thought, and charged into the fight. Lucky for me. She laid low the first attacker by merely flicking her high-powered flashlight in his eyes. He fell upon the grass. He fell upon the grass with a cry, his eyeballs momentarily fried. She really could have done that to the rest of them, but by damn, she wanted to fight. The punches, leg strikes, and tackles felt glorious. The thick body armor the goons wore meant that she had to be accurate in her aim. The dim moonlight made it difficult, but that made her even happier. The desire to become a cop had hit her in middle school. She couldn't remember what inspired her, but the urge only grew stronger as she aged. She researched and found she had all the requisite attributes except for one, her size. She was average height and lean build, which combined with her innocent looks made it difficult for her to gain respect. So she trained. Along with playing softball and running track in high school and college, she studied martial arts and taken any classes that focused on self-defense. By the time she'd entered the academy, she'd taken down any man who came at her. She joined a tangle of people near an oak tree that towered over the sidewalk. She could barely distinguish her teammates among the goons now that they had abandoned the ridiculous goggles. She pulled one back with force until his head connected with the tree trunk. The thudding sound made her grin. He fell to the ground, unmoving. Before she could turn, she was pinned against the tree. The man's breath smelled like fish, and his knife was cold against the side of her neck. Amy calculated how she could move without getting sliced open. Before she could act, Archie's voice came through. "Heads up, eh?" One of his wickedly sharp knives landed in the bark beside her cheek, so close that a sliver of wood stung her forehead. Damn, now she would have to apologize for snarking at him for flipping the damn things when he was bored. His accurate aim had just saved her. She pulled the knife out and pushed her arm back, catching the goon in his thigh. Of course, he cried out, loudly. She turned to see him on the ground, bellowing, clutching his leg. There must have been some unspoken communication between the goons, because two of them suddenly tried to grab her. She ducked and danced around them, punching out with the knife when she could. It made contact at least twice. One goon let out a high cry, while the other only grunted. "Move out," Dell's order sounded in her ear. She followed her teammates, looking back to make sure there were no goons left standing. Soon she joined Mick, Dell, and Archie in the plane, while Mateo and Whitaker took off in the car they'd stashed nearby. Besides being a pilot, Archie was the only person who was consistently beat her in pool. He was also better with knives, but she'd been practicing. Obviously, not enough, she thought blackly, remembering her poor aim in the training gym. Mateo was the newest agent. Unlike the rest of the team, he'd been a legit criminal. Daniel loved to recruit from prisons, but most of the rookies hadn't committed hard crimes. Not Mateo, though. He'd worked his way up to the high echelons of a large drug gang operating on the East Coast. Amy often wondered what caused him to become a double agent, but he was too tight-lipped to make that common knowledge. Peter, Malachi, and Daniel knew and trusted him, and so did she. Somehow, Malachi had discovered Mateo was a computer whiz in the making and was teaching him all the ways to hack. Rounding out the team was Dell. She was their group leader, a former Army medic whose iron control was legendary. Nothing fazed her, and she had a wicked wit. Amy adored her, and she considered Dell her closest friend. Her post was on top of a nearby building. As team leader, she ran logistics, kept the time, and made alternate plans on the fly. Actually, Whitaker was the last member of the team. Ugh. He normally stayed out of the fray out of laziness or fear of getting hit in the face. He was Peter's nephew, and that was the only reason they tolerated him. He had yet to endanger anyone by the way he cut corners, but the rest of the team were extra careful around him. His spiteful personality did little to help. Amy was grateful she wouldn't be crammed into the small cockpit with him this time. As much as she disliked water takeoffs, she couldn't fault Archie for his skills. The Cessna Corvallis TTX belonged solely to him, and her name was Darcel. He was a skilled pilot, but sometimes it seemed as if he purposely chose the more dangerous path. She wouldn't be surprised if there had been a private airport available nearby, and Archie had passed it over for the lake. She understood how he wanted to challenge himself. It wasn't as if any of them ever felt unsafe in his care. By the time she bolted in next to him, they were up and away.